So I believe we're live. Time to welcome everyone. So shall I get started then?
Yes.
Hello. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the session of the Creative Entrepreneurship Lab. My name is Martine Durier-Kopp, and I am the acting Vice President, Research and Academic at NSCAD University. And it's my absolute pleasure and honor to be welcoming everyone to this session. I would like to begin with a territorial acknowledgement. NSCAD is in Mi'kma'ki on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship which Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik Maliseet peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. So having said that, just a few words of introduction before I turn it over to Greg. We have a great turnout today. We're thrilled to see alumni, students, and other cultural entrepreneurs who are joining us, cultural entrepreneurs active and aspiring. Welcome. We're thrilled to see such a strong interest. And also delighted to be launching these free webinars as a way of further introducing NSCAD's Creative Entrepreneurship Lab. Interestingly, based on a recent survey of our alumni community at NSCAD University, we learned that 91% of respondents said their degree from NSCAD was a fantastic investment, but 46% of these surveyed alumni felt they needed further guidance on how to prepare them for the economy, for how to be a member and how to take part in this economy. And that is exactly the role of the Creative Entrepreneurship Lab, to address that gap. And with sessions such as these, you'll learn new tools, new techniques, new strategies and insights, and all kinds of wonderful things that you're going to be hearing from Greg and from our guest speakers today that will help you develop and grow your brand and business, and thus either join or strengthen your position within the creative economy. So we hope that you enjoy today's conversation with our wonderful guests, Scott Ferguson, Michael-Andreas Kuttner. We're so grateful to have them here with us today. And we hope that you'll continue to support us as the Creative Entrepreneurship Lab continues to grow and progress. Thanks very much, Greg. Over to you.
Right. Thank you very much, Martine, for the introduction and for the context. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. Like you already know, this is our first, I will say, inaugural session of the series of webinars we'll be delivering within the next few weeks. We already know the Creative Entrepreneurship Lab helps students, alumni, and members of the creative artistic community here in Halifax and Nova Scotia to gain new perspective of their work. Our goal is really to bridge, like Martin just mentioned, to bridge the gap between the industry, the business ecosystem, and the talents, the pool of talents we have here in our province. So for us is to how we can connect, how we can help them commercialize their talent, whether working as an independent artist, starting a collective, or launching a business. So the lab at NSCAD offers those workshops. We offer workshops, coaching, technical assistance, and basically network. We help students, we help fledgling artists, and even sometimes seasoned artists we help them with access to education, access to partnership, access to financing. This is why we put together a series of MOUs where we can actually have the opportunity to leverage our social infrastructure. So we probably asking why we tend to we making so much effort to get this going. Why is this? Some people would think that creative entrepreneurship, or just like the art world, is just something that going on the fringe of society. This is not the case. This is the creative economy. The creative economy, it represents roughly, I'll say, $2.5 trillion globally. So it's a big deal. If you take a province such as Ontario, it's way beyond industries such as mining for around $13 billion a year. In Nova Scotia, it's around 975 million, close to a billion. So it's a big deal. Creative economy, it's a big deal. So our artists, our creative entrepreneurs, they are creators of wealth. Actually has grown by 92%, almost double. So it's a big deal. This is why we're putting that kind of effort in establishing an infrastructure that can help our talent, that can help our artists to thrive, to foster that environment so they can actually do business. So we can say, is it valuable? Yes, it is. Cultural entrepreneurship is valuable. Creative entrepreneurship is valuable. According to Stats Canada, performing arts companies, we have an average revenues of $123,900. 92% of them are profitable. Independent artists, writers, and performers, $110,900, 95%. It means this is a business. When you take restaurant, it's around 50% success rate. So start a creative business. This is not a failing endeavor. It's an opportunity. And this is something we should take seriously, because it's not just to build wealth, but it reinforces our cultural identity, help diversity. So this is why we put together those programs to help you. And I'm gonna say that, yes, it's thriving. Yes, having a business, you have a great chance to succeed, but it takes effort. It takes effort, it takes seriousness, it takes dedication. Okay, it takes a strong mind to be true to yourself to succeed. And among those I know who actually personify those qualities are our two guests we have today, Scott Ferguson and Michael-Andreas Kuttner. Scott Ferguson is the president and the founder of FMP, Matrix and Music Production, and Michael-Andreas Kuttner, which is a VP Technology for Immersive Cinema and founder of Kaleidoscope, one of the most, I'll say one of the success stories. So here today we have two seasoned entrepreneurs, great artists, and basically our success stories here in Nova Scotia. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming here today and for sharing your experience and wisdom. Thank you for coming. And I would like to ask everyone to join me and welcome Scott Ferguson and Michael-Andreas Kuttner. Thank you. Michael, you have the mic, please.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always nice to come back and say hello to the NSCAD community. I graduated from NSCAD with my Bachelor of Design in 1993, and I pretty much knew from the start of even in my university career, that I wanted to eventually end up working for myself. So pretty much, again, from the beginning, I jumped out and started working on my own creative endeavors, doing private work. I was very much wanting to have a company. And although I do not have a business degree, I kind of consider all of the companies that I did participate in and start to have been very much an ad hoc MBA all by themselves. One of the main things being that there's no greater lesson that you can get in business by going out, trying something, and getting your ass kicked at it. So this is a few tips from a guy who has had his ass kicked. So maybe we'll go to the next slide. So these tips are kind of general. They're probably, a lot of people are probably going to sort of know these as having gone through it, but they're ones that I figured I would really like to have had when I started out into being an entrepreneur. And the very first one that you can sort of start nurturing as soon as you're in school is to just care very much about what you do. What I found in just wanting to get out there is that becoming an expert in my field as much as I possibly could helped prepare me for all the things that would come next. So the thing, when I was actually at school, when I was at NSCAD, I spent a lot of time, I guess, working on the craft that I was there to understand, and that my particular craft was design. And at that time, it was just at the start of computers becoming a much bigger thing in the design field, both from the perspective of just using computers for layout, for graphic design type things, but also the new kind of burgeoning world of interactive and interface design, which is what I was particularly interested in. So while you're at school, you've got the opportunity to just immerse yourself and spend as much time as possible just completely learning everything you possibly can about your particular field. And the other thing that I found is that, as far as style and talent and your particular look of your own work, that's going to evolve. And that's something that really it happens over time. I remember when I was in school, I wanted to have this sort of unique style, but the reality is that's, again, stuff that time is going to shape on you. So really concentrating on the technical fundamentals, understanding how to apply color theory, understanding how to sort of use the computers, all that stuff. That stuff is those are skills that are always going to be underpinning everything else that you can do. And that's the stuff that I found really allowed me to build so much on top of it after I graduated. And the last bit about that is that people like people who can fix things for them. So if you're technically adept, you can go out and get a job fixing things for people who don't have the time to do those things because they're busy running their businesses. So if we go to the next slide. Point 2 is to secure the bag, which is basically cover yourself. One of the things that I thought of when I was going straight out of school, I thought, okay, I'm going to just hang my shingle and I'll start getting work. But the fact of the matter is, you've got to make sure you can pay the rent and buy groceries and all that sort of stuff, because as I say here, you can't concentrate if you don't know where next month's rent is coming from. So that makes you a poorer quality producer. So really, I recommend to everybody, even if you do have this sort of long-term goal of getting in business for yourself, go out and get a job and work on your business in the evenings and weekends, because making sure that you can just keep yourself going is fundamental to being able to build that next step of where you want to go. And as well, the people who you are going to meet on the job are a massive resource for even after you leave your day job. You're going to keep those relationships, hopefully, for the rest of your life. And I've found a lot of times those relationships came back to me, whether I was hiring people I worked with or just kept in touch with them, and that led to other opportunities. It's very important. So next slide. We can go to the third one is one that I always found difficult, I tend to be a pretty introverted person, but this is very important in anything you do, and that's to meet people. It's the whole idea of the network. I'm not great at working a crowd. I find I can go out and do it, but it really exhausts me at the end of, say, going to an event or something like that. Certainly the pandemic, I read somewhere that the pandemic was just absolute nightmare to people who are extroverts and paradise to people who are introverts, because even if you are interacting with people, it's through a screen. And to some extent, I have found that. But what I have found in meeting people is you don't have to necessarily go out and meet crowds and things. One thing that I've found out is that people are generally very happy to help you if you reach out to them. So if you've got somebody who is, let's say, a professional in the field that you're interested in, it's okay to give them a call and ask if you can go out and pick their brains over coffee. Finding out things that you can learn about either your field or just sort of what the environment is around sort of people hiring for that field or anything like that. People like talking about themselves. They like meeting new people who have the same interests. And I can't emphasize enough that if you just pick up the phone 9 times out of 10, or maybe even 10, people will be quite happy to go out and give you a bit of their time. And to that end, you know, coffee or lunch is a great currency. It's a great way to sort of ice break with someone you've not met before, or even just go out and have time with someone you haven't spent with, who you haven't seen for a while. Just go out, grab a coffee. Not right now, but you know. And it also allows sort of easier conversation, and just being able to do that and come away from those meetings with a good feeling about each other is really important. And of course, you can also offer at the end of that too, if there's ever anything you can do, allowing yourself to do favors for other people always comes back to you. And then we'll just go to the last slide. And the last bit is that it doesn't take money to make money, or it doesn't take that much. You will see, you know, there are those commercials on late night TV where the people, you know, Trump University says for only $60,000, I'll turn you into an entrepreneur, or whatever it is. And I've known people who have gone out and you know, hung their shingle out, and they've put a lot of money into either marketing or advertising or just buying really fancy business cards or something like that. And the reality is that that is not going to do what people think it's going to do. The thing that's going to allow you to have a good and sustainable business is your own reputation and the long period of work that you do to build up this network of contacts, to meet individual people, just show them that you can do what you say you'll do by starting with small jobs, small amounts of work, and then doing a little bit more and getting your good name out there. And the last thing I'll say, you know, as far as ever spending money, is I will spend money in order to get a job, but only buy what you need to do the job. Don't do anything else. Don't, you know, let's say if you need a car to go and be a courier, maybe buy a used Toyota. Don't go out and get yourself a BMW. No one's going to care, because if you get the package from point A to point B, it's at point B. Keep the rest of the money and spend it on your rent, and just keep going. And those are my tips for the start of a creative entrepreneurial lifestyle. Oh, Gregory, I think you're muted.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Michael-Andreas, for doing this, and thank you for sharing those valuable, you know, lessons and advice. Scott.
Hello.
How are you doing? Thank you
Good.
very much for coming. Thank you.
My pleasure. Very, very nice. Michael, I have to commend you on your slides and your hair.
Thank you.
Much better than me.
Yeah, I lucked out in the genetic lottery so far.
Yeah. Not so much that. But yeah, fantastic advice. I have to say, so much of what you've described in your experience echoes, the way things have gone for me in my development and career. Being sort of coming from the audio and music world, I guess I could do slides, but I'm going to talk. So in general, the whole idea of getting going in a career, I find is for me it was a very existential thing. And in my career as I started out as a musician, and you went to NSCAD, I went to St. FX. I have the ring to prove it. And I actually the very back on the wall there. Actually, I'm going to point to it right there. That little plaque means that I was I was in the first graduating class of the St. FX jazz program that they started in 1980. And I came from a very small town in Cape Breton called Homeville, believe it or not. And I grew up quite isolated. But for me, music was a very early passion, probably as young as 3-4 years old. And I feel very fortunate on that end to have known, I guess, from the very beginning, there was never any question for me what I wanted to do. And initially that was a drummer. I came out of, I went through the whole school band situation, and I was just completely on fire and focused on a very narrow creative path as a musician to start with. And fortunately for me, that jazz program at St. FX started the year I was graduating high school in Sydney, Cape Breton. And the timing was really, really good. So I jumped into that, and I really focused on pursuing a very narrow path to start with. And but I guess similar to some of Michael's points, for me, I learned through that process of 4 years at St. FX how much I had interests beyond just that narrow field of focus. So for me, I was, of course, being a jazz drummer was my first passion, but I was the guy running around back in the old days with the reel-to-reel cassette machine, or not cassette, a reel-to-reel tape deck, going around and recording the combos and putting mics. And I had this kind of awakening about how much I loved recording. So that was sort of my first step in branching out. And I have to say that aspect of diversity has really served me well. So I finished at St. FX, and I got my degree in jazz, and kind of an interesting NSCAD connection. When I moved to Halifax in 1984, I guess it was, there was down on Spring Garden Road, there was a restaurant called Pepe's. And it was a rare thing. They had jazz 6 nights a week. And I was very fortunate to wind up kind of getting in on the ground floor and getting to do quite a bit of work there. And I noticed quite a few gigs. There was this young guy that used to poke his head out of the kitchen door frequently, especially during drum solos. But I noticed this guy. So one day I wound up asking, I noticed this young fella around. He's, oh, yeah, it's Jimmy. So I one day I wound up talking to Jimmy, and he said, yeah, I'm going to NSCAD. I'm taking art, and I want to get my degree in art. And I play a bit of guitar, and I songwrite a bit. But I also play some drums, and I love the drums, and I'm fascinated watching you play. So fast forward many years, and sort of the first big break I got in my music career after doing this jazz stint was this group called the Rankin Family, who I'd kind of known them off and on again in various capacities. And when things really bust open for them, they decided they needed a full-time drummer, and I got a call. So I met with them and got talking, and started sharing some stories. And lo and behold, the little Jimmy from the kitchen, who was a dishwasher at Pepe's, was Jimmy Rankin. So there's a little example of a sort of, I guess, spontaneous networking And at the time, I just naturally took an interest. I thought, here's this young guy that really enjoys drums. And so I have to say, many experiences for me along the way, and that's an example, taught me how important it is to be authentic and kind, I guess, are two phrases for me that really matter. And for me, my music and my creativity has always been, I use the word existential, I guess. Some people call it spiritual. For me, it's always been very much a heart and soul thing. And I have to say, in my career, I actually, when I went to St. FX, I minored in economics. I may have been the only jazz drummer to ever do that at St. FX. I don't know. People thought I was nuts. But I have to say that actually, I learned a lot about the importance of, and I started even cogitating back then about this balance of creativity and sustainability as far as a career. And I had lots of very thin years trying to be a jazz drummer, but eventually things opened up, and finding that balance for me between that creativity and that sustainability was I took it very seriously, but I didn't want that to get in the way of my creative development. So there's so many opportunities that come, like Michael said, through networking. Like relationship is so important. You know, the way you interact with people, your interpersonal communications, and I have to say, the way my career developed, something as simple as taking interest in being kind to a dishwasher was actually instrumental in one of the most powerful experiences I ever had in my career. And as much as I did lots of very cool things before that, kind of my big breakout gig with the Rankin family, I have to say that stepping stone for me has propelled me to do things I never thought possible really in my career. And that was kind of spawned in a way, like, well, you know, I actually knew Raylene Rankin at St. FX. She and a lot of friends in the music department. But, you know, kind of meeting Jimmy and having that interaction, it actually did make a difference. So when it came down to them making a choice about who to trust to join the band, they knew me, and I had a good interaction with them, and that definitely was a factor that helped a great deal and creating for me, which was probably my single biggest opportunity, because I had a 14-year ride between the full band, and then the Rankin sisters had their own show, which I music directed for 6 more years. And it gave me the opportunities for experience that I never would have had otherwise. You know, so I was, you know, this kid from Homeville, Cape Breton, who started, I was able to grow a beard at 16. And back then, you know, you could kind of sneak your way into bars if people didn't think you were underage. And that's how I started my professional career at 16, was playing in bars because I could grow a beard. And the guys didn't think I played too bad. But anyway, that's, you know, a lot of these things that it's so important to understand that there's, you know, you've got creativity, you've got your sustainability and entrepreneurship, and all that is extremely important. But for me, the glue to it all is how you have relationships with people. And the thing that's probably helped me the best is that I've fortunately tended to not piss off a lot of people. You know, I've worked really hard, on trying not to be a nasty person. You know, and it matters to me that when, you know, I'm lucky, I guess on the business side, I have to mention, believe it or not, my mother, because she started out as a dental nurse. And then I guess when I was a teenager, she wound up finding a calling in the insurance industry of all things. But and back then it was all a man's game, you know, back in the late 70s, have a woman selling insurance was, but she always would say to me, and I was really proud of her, remarkable how well she did so quickly in her career. And she regularly would say to me that here's the difference, is that I actually care about people and I'm nice to them. And I don't do things behind their back. I'm authentic, I'm honest, and I do the best for my clients. And I saw how well that worked for her. And she had such challenges as a woman working in this male-dominated field. But that actually, that whole caring and bringing empathy to the game is what like all of a sudden it exploded for it because people went, wait, now I really trust this person that they're doing the best for me. They actually have my best interests at heart.
That really rings with me. And to what you were saying before, the two words that came to mind for me when you were talking about being at the restaurant with Jimmy Rankin is that those two things, like sincerity and integrity, I think are, there are so many other, you can get, all sorts of networking software and go and take courses and all that. But I think those basic things about, that they're probably basic business lessons that go back to, thousands of years ago. I mean, if you are real about something and, you are interacting with a person out of an interest in, there's self-interest, but there's also interest in that other person, and having that sort of shared interest. People will know that, as opposed to just, you're kind of like, oh, I'm just looking for a job, and just trying to sort of quickly hit up every LinkedIn contact that and never get back in touch with them again or something like that.
Well, and as I'm sure you found, Michael, people, especially in the creative industries, people are very intuitive. Like they can see through, like I found most of the people in the music industry, people could just see through you in a heartbeat, and if you put on this facade, then most people are going to see through it. Well, some people you might be able to fool with, but most often you really can't. And that's I feel very fortunate that I had a lot of the bad experiences I had early on helped teach me that. Because it's not all, as I'm sure you've experienced, there's, the creative industries is one of the hardest things to be able to be successful in. And even your level of success, like I think if I'd become a neurosurgeon or gone into Bitcoin long ago, I probably, I get that stuff. I probably could have done those things and I'd make like 10 times the money I make now. But I can look in the mirror and I feel I'm being true to myself. And it's also always been very important to me that when I'm working with people, whether I'm a drummer working with a band or whether, like nowadays it's more, being a producer in the studio. And I'm right now I'm running a 29 concert live streaming series for the musicians unit in Halifax. So I'm doing like 4 cameras and full multi-track audio live streaming every day for 3 weeks that fell together in a heartbeat. But even there, that was, I started getting, music has always been my thing, but I got fascinated with video editing years ago and started branching out. And I've hired quite a few NSCAD graduates for videography and lighting and things like that. And I just, that was an aspect of diversity, but it totally came from passion and interest. I just loved, getting into Final Cut and editing. For me, I was like a kid in a candy shop. I had a ball with it. And then merging that with the music. Then when the pandemic started, I kind of looked at all that and went, okay, well, what's it reminds me here. I'm jamming, by the way. This is like stream of consciousness stuff. But I had one of my best friends who's look him up. Actually, his name's David McGinley, and he's an author, and he's a chaplain in oncology at the hospital. And a 4-time, David McGinley?
David, yes, I do.
He's a 4-time cancer survivor, and I was in the school band with him in Sydney, Cape Breton back in the 70s. And we go way back. Our families go way back. So I'll never forget when the day I got the call that the Rankins were retiring, which was the end of this huge run for me, he just happened to be visiting. And I took the call from the manager. I had to take the call, and I got off the call, and there he was, this guy who's very uniquely gifted as a personal counselor, happens to be one of my best friends. And I said to him, I was shocked. I was stunned. Like, this was so much of my identity for all these years. And he said to me, it's really not that difficult. You need to find, really look at where your greatest gifts of talent are and find where the greatest human need is for those talents. And if you pair those up, you can never go wrong. and if you bring an authentic heart and a kind heart to that,
Yep.
that's it. That's really it. That's kind of a bit of it's not difficult, but there are words that have never left me.
That kind of folds in if we can plug the NSCAD thing. I mean, NSCAD that folds really well into the actual motto that NSCAD has, which is head, hand, heart, or head, heart, hand. And it really is. I mean, that if as you say, I mean, if nothing else, a creative job really is about being able to put yourself out there, and that sort of sincerity, and give yourself to other people, perhaps in a way that a more, a job that's maybe not necessarily of that type of in that type of industry. I mean, if I was driving a tractor, I wouldn't have that kind of ability to put so much of myself out on the line. And I think there is something really unique to that does require maybe more concentration on those sorts of qualities that David was talking about than it might in other industries.
It's kind of like a process, and I think you have a question like that from how much value do you place on real world experience versus education as an entrepreneur? I guess this is a student. So how much you value real world experience versus education? I mean, based on what you just mentioned earlier, you and Michael, I guess a lot. Huh? So Scott.
I mean, for me, getting my education was, I guess, for me, I look at it as a stage of my real world experience. I mean, getting in that environment when I was at St. FX, it was the very first year of the jazz program. There's a lot of growing pains, but it seriously kicked my ass, because all of a sudden I was in this condensed environment. And it's the challenges are there, and a lot of interpersonal skills, a lot of the groundwork of learning all these things came through that educational process. So for me, that was like, I see that as a big part of my real world, that those 4.5 years that I spent in that educational environment were extremely important for the grounding. And again, I learned as much stuff that I shouldn't do as much as stuff that I should do, because you're challenged all the way around from your professors, from your peers. There's and to be honest, back when I went to jazz school, it was a lot less, shall we say, about friendship and kindness, as it was a pretty almost dog eat dog environment, which is, you'd think would be counterintuitive for this creative art form of jazz. But guess what? Some of the most, the most stuck up, nasty people are can be jazz musicians. Honestly, like back then it was like, are you kidding me? Like, these are horrible people, anyway, but you learn that, and you learn that in every creative, but I mean, for me, I was able to take away from that going, that's, like a great quote that I remember is, you don't know who you are till you know who you're not. And that was a big takeaway for me from all of these experiences going, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to treat people that way, so for me, like school was a wonderful place. And, I hope NSCAD isn't nearly as catty as St. FX was in 1980. But back then,
I'd echo a lot of what you're saying. I think certainly there wasn't necessarily a line between like, here's school and here's the rest of life. One of the things that I did wish, I guess, was that I did have a little bit more training or education in how to relate to a client or something like that. But at the same time, in my particular program, since we were, it was a graphic design program, we were doing a lot of work on how to prepare presentations for clients and things like that. And the other side of things, if we're just looking at practical business type things like billing, I read a lot of books. And funny enough, probably really the only semi-formal education I had in business was a business management course I took in high school for 1 year. And I actually got, I think it was in grade 11, I got an enormous amount out of that just stayed with me. And a client I once had was actually very informative to me about this whole thing. If you look at it from a perspective of what they're calling lifelong learning, it's, you know, when you leave the academy, it doesn't mean that you've stopped getting educated. It's just a new way of getting educated. And I think that's an important sort of tack to take. The thing that I found when I was at NSCAD and being grilled by the professors, and we were going into some really intense stuff, was if nothing else, it honed my work ethic like nothing before. And that stayed with me for my entire life.
Right. I have another question. How long do you keep your day job? How long do you keep your day job and pursue your craft on the side? How long does it take you to launch?
Ooh. And
how do you know you'll be able to make a living off your craft?
Oh, those are good questions.
Yeah.
How long do you keep your day job? I think you keep your day job until you can make sure that you've got some what they call in the investment world or the entrepreneurship world runway. And runway means that you've got a stretch of time that you're comfortable with, that you're willing to, you know, put your give it your all. And let's say you save up enough that you know that you could be okay, let's say for 6 months.
Okay.
It might be a longer or shorter period of time, depending on who the person is. But if you can get that runway and you can say, okay, I'm now willing to take the next X number of, you know, amount of time and really push myself at turning my side business into my full business. I think the other part of that equation is don't quit your day job and decide to focus on your side business if you don't have the clients together. It's not like you get to then quit. Like, I saved up 6 months of rent and food. Now I'm going to go and do that. No, build up that clientele, those contacts, whatever it is, and get to the point where some of those side contracts are getting to a point where you know, maybe if you do this job, that job might be able to pay for, you know, most of your needs for the next 6 months or whatever, and then you keep working on top of that. I don't think that there's no one answer that's going to fit everybody. I think it has to be a personal decision. It has to sort of speak to your own willingness to, you know, hustle and work all day and all night with very little sleep, and to, you know, if you've got let's say you are married and you have a child, that's a whole different set of parameters than if you're just living on your own and you're okay to live in a tent for the entire summer.
What about you, Scott?
That's a great point. And of course, everything's changed so much. I mean, back when, you know, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 58. So back for me, when I was really in the early stages of my career, it was, well, I graduated St. FX in '84, and by 86 I was married. And then we, you know, by the time I out of St. FX, I started out, you know, there was a bunch of my friends that we got an apartment up in Clayton Park on Harlington Crescent, and we couldn't afford to get the power hooked up right away. We're trying to borrow from our parents, and so we were using by candlelight. We had enough for the down payment for the rent, but we didn't have the power on. So by candlelight, we're filling out application forms for McDonald's and Burger King, you know, after 4-year jazz degrees, you know. But I wound up working at the Keg as a dishwasher. And then I was lucky to get a job at back then Music Stop, long before it was Long McQuaid. And at least I was moving the direction of my industry. But I did the day job thing for quite a while. And started getting gigs and working as a performing musician. But I mean, things have changed so much. And one thing I really hope that happens, maybe a fringe benefit of all this COVID stuff, is I'd love to see guaranteed universal income, which I think would be would change this whole discussion, as far as creative people. And I actually had, not to get off track, but I love Ireland's model. Ireland now has a whole situation where if you're in the creative industries, you pay no income tax below a certain level. Basically, they see the value of creative enterprises such that they really make it work for people to go through this phase and help them focus on the creativity and not have to keep a minimum wage job to survive. So, that's all going to change, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years very quickly. But I mean, in my case, it was a combination of working at a music store, and I taught drums at the conservatory, and all I wanted to do was gig, but I knew I couldn't just do that. And I had a young family, but it did reach a point where I did have to take the leap of faith. Unfortunately, I had the support of my wife and my family, and I just said, that's it. I'm not going to do these other things anymore. I've kind of reached, I think, a critical threshold, but it was very much an unknown and a leap of faith. And I just said, that's it. I got to go for this. I can't, these things are not serving me anymore. They're pulling me back. And so it did reach, for me, that critical point. And I took the leap, and I was so glad I did. But that leap of faith, you have to realize, is being a creative entrepreneur. Michael mentioned work ethic. Oh my heavens. The amount of hours you have to put in compared to your average doctor or lawyer or or paralegal or whatever. I mean, to make a decent living, it's astonishing how much. You better be ready to put a lot of time in. And things, of course, your schedule is going to change. I'm all over the map.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate through COVID, because I have to say, through the diversification and developing these other interests, I've been able to, I'm going through a period right now where I'm literally 12 to 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it's just because opportunities hit. And fortunately, my circumstance, all I can do is eat, sleep, and work, but it's working, for this window of time. And that's going to happen, and you have to be ready for that when it does, to take advantage of it.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm currently working on 4 concurrent long-term projects.
Yeah.
Nothing beats work ethic. That's for sure. I have another. We have plenty. I have another question. Quick. How important? Okay. How important is location? Since a lot of people are moving to the US for better opportunities. How do you see the future of creative businesses in Nova Scotia?
I think it is far less important than it used to be. I'm going to try and answer my end of things quickly. I know there are several other questions in the queue, but just look at the last year. So much has been able to get done over Zoom and remotely. And I think we've gotten to this sort of critical tipping point where there's enough sort of connectivity, and computer power is cheap enough that you can actually put together your own pretty good studio for not an enormous amount of money at home, and get professional results while living the kind of life you want to. And I think, especially in the creative fields, quality of life is probably, at least with the people I know, quality of life tends to be brought up the ladder more than perhaps other fields where you're just looking for top dollar.
Right. But you, Scott, what about you, Scott? Yeah.
Oh, I agree totally. Yeah. For me, I had opportunities to move away after I graduated, and I just chose, no, I think I'm going to give it a shot here in Nova Scotia. And I'm so glad I did. I think my career would have gone very differently. I doubt it would have been better if I'd moved away. And a lot of it's because, there's a reason why a lot of people are starting to move to Nova Scotia
Yeah.
and in Eastern Canada, because there is this quality of life, like Michael said, and it's a much smaller network of people to work with, and that has its advantages if you've got these other things in a row. If you're an authentic person and you're kind and you've got talent to offer, then circumstances will work out for you. And I've got a lot of optimism about what's happening here in Nova Scotia right now. I've been involved in a couple film projects lately, and it's astonishing what I'm hearing from some of the top people in the industry, how much interest there is coming this way. Not just because of the talent pool we have for a small population, but look, the way we've handled COVID, this whole situation, the quality of life here is quite astonishing compared to many places. And I'd say I've got about a 30 to 40% bump in my overall work. Wow. After 2.5 months of complete nothingness when COVID hit. After that, by June of last year, it picked up, and I've been busier than I've ever been. And I think and a chunk of the work is because of COVID. And even I've gotten some film work on the audio side that only happened because of COVID. And people said, well, we can't film here, but we can film in Halifax. And whether it be, I did a big commercial, actually wound up being the location for the new Sidney Crosby Tim Hortons commercial. So we had sit in here for a day, and it just kind of fell in my lap, and it only happened here because of COVID, because we could film and they almost could nowhere else. And I've worked on a couple other feature films doing some audio and soundtrack work. And again, the attitude is, we've got such a wonderful thing here. So people have to follow their hearts, but I feel very optimistic about what's going to happen in Eastern Canada in the creative arts.
I agree.
So I agree. I think you just answered the next question we just got. So I think I'll move on to another one. So one member, I always try to lead with kindness, but I find I can easily get walked over in business. Any tip on how to balance the two?
Yeah,
that
great
is
question.
Oh, great question. That's the $1 billion question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
you want to take it?
You want to go?
Well, you go ahead. I yacked there for a bit. I'll go after you. You go ahead. I got an answer, but I want to hear yours.
Yeah.
Well, with Kaleidoscope, which was the animation company that I ran for 14 years, I was lucky enough to have a business partner who was much more of a hard ass than me. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go and find a jerk for a business partner. And he wasn't. To some people he was, but he was a fantastic guy. He is. But what I will say is, I think that having a business partner can be very advantageous, or at least having people, if you don't have a business partner, if you are sort of just on your own, having people who you can lean on as your sounding board, people who you can, who you're close to and you can get on the phone with and have a frank conversation about, okay, well, I'm in this situation with a client and I'm finding it really difficult. And do you have any advice? I think that is worth its weight in gold, because of the fact that any individual is not going to have all the answers, and to have as sort of wide a group of people, or even just a couple of people who you can trust and whose sort of counsel you can rely on, can be really helpful in getting you through those difficult situations. It doesn't mean that you have to sort of go back to someone and be shitty to them. You don't have to, but there are times when you may have to be a little bit more firm than you're comfortable in being, and at least being able to bounce that off of somebody else and say, have that sort of sober second thought of being able to say, well, if I do this, is that over the line? And if they say, no, really, that's okay, and here's a way that you might be able to phrase this diplomatically, I think that's that can be really helpful in sort of trying to figure out a lot of these situations. Because sometimes even you might very much be feeling like you're getting walked on by, let's say, a client. And it might not, it might in some cases be that that you're being even very giving, and the client might be, well, okay, she said that she'd do that, then I'll ask another thing, and I'll ask another thing. And then if you do put your foot down, the client may say, oh, okay, that's fine. I figured you were being really kind of almost too nice about this. So that's my perspective.
I have they asked me that question, how do you see the future of creative economy, twice, but I guess you already answered that. Another question I have is, did either of you mentor to help do either of you have mentors to help you along the way? If not, do you wish that you did?
Did I have mentors, people who mentored me? Is that the question?
Right. The question is,
Yeah.
have you ever had any mentor? And
Yeah.
if not, would did you, have you ever wished that you had one?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's been a critical thing for me. And it initially was teachers, certainly friends and fellow, creative individuals, especially in the music industry. But at different junctures in my career, I wound up working with people that changed my life. Absolutely. And that was, again, kind of the stepping stones of getting myself in positions where I could have these experiences to learn and be around people who have been there, done that, and had something to offer me. And that really helped me, I guess, avoid a lot of pitfalls. Because if you don't know what you're doing, you can make a lot of mistakes, and you can make a lot of bad decisions if you're inexperienced. But to have somebody who's willing to sit down with you and go, okay, here's my experience. This worked, this didn't, and be honest and authentic with you. I mean, that was career changing for me. And I had many mentors like that along the way, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. I have another one. Is your mentorship? How do you like it? How important do you find it? Formal or casual when starting out?
I would say certainly I had a lot of mentors as well, both formal and casual. We had during Kaleidoscope, we had a board of advisors who we'd bounce things off of every sort of 6 months. A great bunch of people, and they were, I guess, more formal because they would come together and we'd have some sandwiches. And again, that goes back to what I noted in my slide presentation. People are, if you ask politely, and people are oftentimes willing to give so much of their time to you. And for our advisory board, they weren't paid, nothing like that. And these were some people who were sort of captains of industry. And they would come together, every 6 months and spend a couple of hours at our office, and we'd be able to sort of tell them what we were doing and give them our problems, and they would give us their best advice. And so that was fantastic. But informal as well. I mean, everyone can be a mentor. This is the thing. I mean, if you've got a question and you want to bounce it off of somebody, even if that person is a colleague. I mean, one of the things that I really noticed about my education when I went to NSCAD is that I learned absolutely as much from my fellow students as I did from my teachers. And every one of those students is a mentor because they're coming at a problem from their own perspective and with their own background. And a lot of times with a different take on a solution than I would have come up with. So I think the more you can talk with people, the better. In my case, especially with Kaleidoscope, having that business partner, we were 50-50 owners of the company, and being able to come in every day and just talk back and forth about whatever was beyond valuable to me. So I guess the more you open yourself, the more those rewards can come back to you, and the more you can be then a mentor to those people as well. It's always a back and forth kind of relationship.
Okay, I have another one. I'm sorry, I'm kind of like mixed up with them. Were you scared to start your business? If so, how did you overcome that fear? The uncertainty.
Oh yeah, I was. Yeah, I mean, there was this. I don't know if I was scared. I certainly had trepidation on certain levels because it's but there's no doubt the timing was right for me when as far as starting my actual company. It was I started it just before the whole Rankin family touring situation ended, and but I knew it was right. I knew it was the right thing to do, and I knew that by taking the steps, and it was a big investment in equipment and facility and everything else, but I knew, yeah, and there's anxiety around it, of course, but I really never doubted for a second that it was the right thing to do.
Okay.
I felt very much the same. I don't know. I mean, I went into it again when I was pretty young. I mean, I was out of university, so I was probably 23 when I started. And when you're that young, I think there's an energy that is available to you. Certainly, I had way more energy when I was 23 than I do now that I'm 51. I'm 51, by the way. You asked it.
And a young pup.
Yeah. And I mean, I had a passion for what I wanted to do. And at the time, it was something that not a lot of other people, especially in Nova Scotia, were doing. And that was interactive design. And it was kind of, for me, it was born at least as much out of a sense that nobody else was going to give me a job doing this, because there just weren't. I was kind of at the leading edge of this stuff. So I started this company with the idea that I was going to go and sort of proselytize this to the masses, and I'd be able to make my own job. And eventually that did happen. But again, probably some of that fear was mitigated by the fact that I did at the same time have another job. And so I'd work my 9-to-5 job. Then I'd leave my 9-to-5 job, and I would go. We fairly early on, we rented a small office space, and then I'd go to the office and I'd work from, I don't know, I'd have supper, work from 6 until midnight or 2 a.m. Go home, sleep, get up, just do it over again, and then the weekends we'd just be going from morning to night. And to me, it was an adventure. It wasn't so much something scary, and I wasn't working that hard because I knew if I didn't, everything was going to collapse. I was working that hard because I was massively passionate about it. And that makes all the difference.
Yeah.
So we have a last one. I think we have the last question. You want to say something first, Scott, before we move on to the last question?
Well, I would say just on the topic of I starting my company. I have to say back then it was as much as, of course, I was so passion motivated, but I always, my favorite thing to do for years was performing in the studio as a drummer, and I just loved it so much, and I wasn't getting as much work as I wanted. So I guess it was a little bit of arrogance in a way, because I thought, well, I'm trying to get in the good graces of all these producers, and it's working with some of them, but what happens if I'm the producer? Then I can hire myself all the time. And initially I thought, well, I love doing this so much. Well, and I realized I did have an aptitude for the computer and technical side of things, but that kind of drove me. It was that as much as I still perform regularly as a musician in the studio, I don't, my days of wanting to be the best jazz drummer in the world coming out of school, I mean, that fired me up, but that's not what I do now, And I guess I just want to mention, at times you morph, there's a constant evolution in morphing. And who I am now and my perspectives have changed so much. And really, honestly, when I graduated university, I really wouldn't have seen me doing everything I'm doing now, but to be perfectly honest, I'm so glad I am. I think I'm more fulfilled, I'm more creatively inspired now than I've ever been, and a lot of that's because of the diversity.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Scott,
So
sorry, I have one
go
last
ahead.
thing.
Yeah,
Scott,
go ahead.
do you sort of look back at this point and sort of with all of this sort of perspective go, wow, if I'd known back then where I'd be now, I would be terrified.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of it, like you talked about, that one question earlier about, how to balance sort of being a kind, nice person and not being taken advantage of. Well, to be perfectly honest, that's been one of my biggest challenges because guess what? I was taken advantage of horribly. I was almost bankrupt several times by business partners and people who just went, there's somebody I can get something out of. And I didn't have good boundaries. So that's one thing I had to learn. One of the biggest challenges was learning how to have good boundaries and knowing my breaking points on circumstances, but still being true to myself as being because you can have good boundaries and still be a nice person, but it's hard to do. People who are arseholes find it a lot easier to have boundaries because they just but when you don't want to be that way on an interpersonal level, but it is a challenge. But I feel a lot better about who I am now with that, and I highly doubt I'm going to get taken advantage of again. But I don't have to be nasty to achieve that. I finally, I think, found a good balance. Yeah.
Right. So the last one, what advantage do you feel your creative experience has given you as an entrepreneur? As entrepreneurs, see, does it play something to be creative and to be an entrepreneur, right? Do you feel you have an advantage being being a creative person?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. One thing that I have found out since my early days of arrogance of youth, and back when I was younger, I knew so much more than I do now.
Yeah.
But when I was over the years, one thing that I've really learned is that everybody is creative in one way or another, and even if you don't necessarily work in a creative industry, there's so much creativity that can go into any number of industries. But if you're talking about that sort of artistic creativity that I had in my background, I was always interested in any number of different. I started off being interested when I was very young, 7 or 8, in the visual arts. I wanted to be a painter. I was in a band in high school and spent some time with a really great bunch of guys recording stuff, and I learned about like 4-track recording and mixing and microphones and all that sort of stuff, and that was cool. And then went into graphic design, and then sort of computer-aided design, and also actually did a lot of programming when I was in university. And all these different things, I kept all of them, and so that when I ended up going out into ultimately, which what ended up a big part of my job, which was being an animation producer, a TV producer. All of these different experiences all sort of came together, and it didn't matter if it was something that I did when I was 7 or did when I was 15 or did at NSCAD. All of those things fed into and were a training ground. My entire life was this training ground for this new stuff. And the more of that background that I had, the more of a cushion I had of sort of technical and I guess creative experimentation from my past that helped me come up with sort of new solutions when I needed to.
Yeah. Scott, quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that as an entrepreneur, the creative side, I think the whole capacity for critical thought and to be able to come up with potentials, right? I mean, it's because the people that I've worked with on a business level that things didn't work out so good. I found that they just could kind of get so caught up and they get themselves tied in boxes, and they had real trouble being able to think outside the box. I think if you're a creative person, you're just naturally, I guess, more suited to be able to come up with different solutions and be able to think outside the box. And I think creatively that's helped me a great deal on the business side of things. Yeah.
Right. And before we wrap this up, I'm just gonna follow up on what you just said. I say that to my students. I said, to be a CEO of a company, a good strategist, I'll take a creative person over an accountant any time of day. And I'm an accountant. I'm an accountant, right? I'm an accountant, right? So, but I'll take a creative person anytime because of the way they think, not binary, but plenty of possibilities. So yes, I'll give you my the question. I'll give my own my own opinion on this. Yes, it helps. It helps a lot to be a creative person. It helps a lot. It helps you adapt. It helps you make the adjustments necessary. It helps you see things clearly, sometimes not single-minded. So I think it helps. That's my opinion. That's the way I see it. And thank you very much, gentlemen, for sharing your experience with us. Thank you for giving your time. And yes, when I made that decision to invite you, we definitely knew we won't go wrong with you. So we really appreciate it. We really appreciate that wealth of information and expertise. And for those who are watching us, I'll say thank you for coming. Thank you for attending the CEL. We need the whole, I would say, the whole creative economy, the whole creative community here in Nova Scotia. We need your support. We need your help. Whether you can support by donating, you can support by mentoring, you can support by doing what our esteemed guests are doing right now, sharing their experience with us. There's a lot of investment in terms of human resources being poured into that project. Is because the potential is here, right? The potential to become a full-fledged, I would say, top of the line creative industry nationally. I think we have that potential, right? The potential is there. So for me, all we need is just a little bit more help, right? Some dedication, from our, other partners, especially from the public sector, to realize that this is a big deal. $1 billion a year, this is not something you can just brush off like that. So I would also like to thank the communication team, Jolene, William, Megan, Linda, Bruce the Bay. Thank you very much for putting this, and thank you for organizing all of this, and thank you for our audience, our participants, for attending. We hope we'll see you next week and for our next webinar. Thank you very much, and enjoy your afternoon, that beautiful sunny afternoon. I mean, if you are in Halifax.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.